With less than 1 month left until The Rise of Skywalker is released, there's some evidence that the new series The Mandalorian is having an impact on the interest in The Rise of Skywalker. Here we've got a chart showing the YouTube views of the Last Jedi's main trailer, the Endgame main trailer, and the Rise of Skywalker main trailer. Now these are the views on YouTube, just from the actual official channels. There are other copies of the movies out there on all kinds of different YouTube channels. And the Last Jedi and the Rise of Skywalker trailers were released about 2 months out from when the movie was out, so they're quite a like-for-like comparison. I put Endgame on here as well just to get an idea of what exactly it did on YouTube. It is the biggest film of all time. It had the biggest opening weekend, and obviously we're not expecting The Rise of Skywalker to compete with that, but it just puts it in comparison as to where exactly it is. So we can see here with Endgame, its trailer was released about a month and a half before its actual movie was out. So again, not quite a like-for-like, but the Last Jedi and the Rise of Skywalker comparisons are quite good to look at. With the chart zoomed out like this, it looks like the Rise of Skywalker and the Last Jedi are running at around about the same rate, with the Rise of Skywalker underneath where The Last Jedi was. Now, with this film being 2 years newer than The Last Jedi, and just generally more people are on YouTube now than there were 2 years ago, you would imagine that if interest in the two films was the same, you would actually get more views. But what we're seeing is less views for The Rise of Skywalker compared to the same time for The Last Jedi trailer on YouTube. Now, it is difficult to tell here with how it's zoomed out, but there has been an increase in The Rise of Skywalker that coincides the release of The Mandalorian. So the green line does in fact go up compared to the angle that it was running at before the release of The Mandalorian. Here are the actual daily totals for how many people viewed the Star Wars Rise of Skywalker trailer. So if we look at the top section, which have the black numbers, that's before The Mandalorian was released, and the bottom section in blue, that's at and after The Mandalorian was released. The right-hand column has the percentage change in viewers, and we can see it starts about 1.1% here, 0.7, 1.2, 0.8, 0.3, 0.6, 0.6, 0.6, 0.5, 0.7, 0.5, 0.5. So it's slowly decreasing down to 0.5% increase per day. The next number there is when the first episode of The Mandalorian was released, and we can see it jumps up from 0.5% to 0.9%. It then drops back down to 0.5 and 0.5 again, and then the next episode of The Mandalorian was released, and it goes up to 1.1%, and then we get 0.6, 0.9, 0.9, 0.7, 0.7, 0.7, and then 1% again with the latest version of The Mandalorian being released. So it doesn't look like it's just a coincidence. It does look like there is a change in the number of viewers of this Rise of Skywalker trailer on YouTube that coincides with The Mandalorian, and The Mandalorian is generally popular with most people. I'm sure there's lots of bad reviews out there, but there seems to be a lot of people very happy with what The Mandalorian is actually doing, and I think here's the evidence that's actually having an effect on the interest of the next Star Wars movie. This chart here shows the same information but in a different way. It shows the total number of daily views for the trailer. The 3 red circles are where the Mandalorian episodes were released, and so it was higher and slowly going down, 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 and then it kind of meandered around a little bit before the first Mandalorian release, and you can see the spike up at the first Mandalorian release. The next couple of days it went back down again, then on the previous Friday's release it spiked back up again, and then it remained higher up, but it did go down a little bit, and then it spiked up once again on the next Mandalorian release. So it does look like there's some sort of correlation here, rather than it just going down and down, 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 which was what was happening generally before The Mandalorian was actually happening. And yet another way we can show the same information is this chart here shows the percentage difference in views between The Last Jedi and The Rise of Skywalker. The red arrow indicates where The Mandalorian was released, and we can see that the line spikes up a bit and then it starts curling around and flattening out. And then where the red arrow points up, we can see that it's still fairly flat, but it does change trajectory and angle up the way, and it moves up past 80%. So it looked like it was flattening out around about the 77 or 76% mark. That's how many viewers it was getting compared to the previous film's views on YouTube. And again, it should be higher really if it's got the exact same amount of interest. So the fact that it's lower to the 75% range shows just how much less the interest is in The Rise of Skywalker compared to the interest for The Last Jedi before The Last Jedi was released. But it does look like it's slowly creeping up. So interest in the Last Jedi, interest in The Rise of Skywalker is increasing as we get further towards the movie's release, which is the opposite of what happened with The Last Jedi, and obviously it was also the opposite of what happens with every film. Okay, when the trailer is first released, lots of people view it, and as time goes by, less and less people view it on a daily basis. Here it's slowly creeping up a little bit. So I think we can use this information to start to look at a ballpark figure as to what we think the opening weekend might be. Now, as time goes on, as we get to about a week away from release, that's when we'll be really able to see what all of the enthusiasm is. But right here, about a month out, we'll be able to get a little bit of a rough idea as to what's actually perhaps going to happen. Here we've got a bar chart showing the opening weekends for all of the Star Wars trilogy films, and they're in order for release here. So with Star Wars A New Hope at the start there, and then we've got The Phantom Menace around about the middle, and then we've got The Force Awakens second last, and we've got The Last Jedi last. And what you can clearly see, whether you look at the actual figure or the inflation-adjusted figure, is the next film has always beaten the previous film, except for The Last Jedi. So The Last Jedi did not get a bigger opening weekend than The Force Awakens, but every other film beforehand in the Star Wars trilogy has managed to get more money on the opening weekend than the previous film. So this, unfortunately, isn't good news because we don't have a direct trend to then extrapolate out to the new film to say that it will beat things. What we have to really assume here is that it may, in fact, continue the new trend. It may be going down. So we may actually get a lower opening weekend for the latest film compared to the previous film. That also coincides with the enthusiasm we can see on YouTube. It's also lower. Now, if we look at the opening weekend difference between The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi, there's around about an 83% difference. And coincidentally, and it is just a coincidence, we've got about an 80% difference of interest in the YouTube viewership between The Last Jedi and The Rise of Skywalker. So it does look like it's possible we're looking at around about an 80% target, or a 20% reduction, of what the previous film got in its opening weekend. What we can also do is add in the two other Star Wars movies that were recently released, Rogue One and Solo. Rogue One is the third last from the right, and Solo is the last one on the right. They're still in order of release. And what we can see is they obviously didn't do as well as the trilogy films, but we can see the downward trend continuing. Rogue One earned a lot more money in its opening weekend compared to Solo, and The Force Awakens earned a lot more money in its opening weekend than The Last Jedi. Now, The Last Jedi and The Force Awakens are far closer than what Solo and Rogue One were, but we can see a bit of a downward trend in enthusiasm, and that's all the opening weekends are. Okay, these aren't the total box office numbers, these are just the opening weekends, which are all to do with hype and enthusiasm. Once the film is out and it's either good or bad and people look at reviews, then it can either go well or not. And Solo obviously went very poorly after it opened, but it also opened very poorly before anyone could actually see the movie and see if it's any good or not. The same goes for Rogue One. Rogue One had a fairly good open weekend, but not as good as the trilogy films, and that was before anyone could see it and decide whether or not it was good or not. So, again, based on this here, it does look like we've got a downward trend going on for what we might expect the opening weekend for The Rise of Skywalker to be. Even though I have said it looks like it's been boosted up by The Mandalorian, I still think it's probable it's going to open up to less money than what The Last Jedi had. On the list here of the biggest North American opening weekends, we've got Avengers Endgame at the top with $357 million. And in the number 3 and the number 4 position there, we have The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi. So The Last Jedi got $220 million without being adjusted for inflation. So I think we're looking at around about 80-85% of that figure right now would be a fair figure for where the next Star Wars film will be. And that's where the green arrow is pointing at roughly, around about the $180 million, $190 million mark. That's probably what we're looking at with the general amount of enthusiasm and also the downward trend that Star Wars seems to be going at. Now, down the bottom of the list here, I've chopped it off at number 19 there, which was the other Star Wars movie. We've got Rogue One, A Star Wars Story. It opened to $155 million. I think it really has to open to more than that number there. I think it'll be a bit of a disaster if it doesn't have $155 million, if it can't open to more than Rogue One. But that's where I think right now, before, we've got about a month to go, that's a fair place to think the movie's actually looking at getting for its opening weekend. Now, after it opens, then maybe the film will be good or bad in people's eyes, and it could go on to earn more or less money than The Last Jedi. But at this stage, not so much to do with how much total box office it'll earn, but what will the opening weekend be? That's where I think is a fair indication of where it'll sit right now, until we get more information as to how much the advance ticket sales were, which we'll get a good number in about a month's time. So those numbers may come in exceptionally good, and we'll obviously have to adjust it up. They may come in exceptionally bad and have to adjust things down. But right now, that's where I think we're sort of looking at about $190 million opening weekend for Star Wars The Rise of Skywalker. Thanks for listening, and I'll catch you next time.